Welcome to the Magical Melting Pot podcast, celebrating America's diversity through food, where we interview fascinating people who share their love for the foods of other cultures. Today we'll be interviewing Judy Hallett, an Emmy Award-winning documentarian who recently wrote a wonderful cookbook called Discovering Tunisian Cuisine. Judy, can you give us a brief background about your career and your longstanding interest in understanding and capturing different cultures to share with others?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've been a documentary filmmaker for nearly 50 years, and I've always been interested in other cultures, especially trying to understand the different cultures and their differences so that people, maybe the world would get a little bit smaller if you understand each other a little bit better. I started out actually wanted to be an international diplomat, but then I went to Paris my junior year and discovered films. I went to films every afternoon, not every afternoon, but 2 or 3 times a week. And when my advisor came over at the end of the year to say, what did you like best about being in Paris? And I gave this very non-academic answer saying, going to films. And he said, well, as a matter of fact, we're going to start a filmmaking class next year. And so for your senior year, you could take film. And so I went back, and this was at Sarah Lawrence College, which is a very progressive school. And I took filmmaking, and it was like a light bulb went on, and I knew this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so I heard about the Peace Corps, and I thought that I could go into the Peace Corps and actually make films. Well, it turned out that I was assigned to Tunisia in North Africa, and I taught English as a second language, but the Peace Corps director let me in the summer make films. So I made my very first film on the Berber villages of southern Tunisia. And with that film, I actually got into UCLA Film School, the graduate school in filmmaking. And so essentially, my career was launched. And I came back and went to UCLA and then got married to Stanley Hallet, who was also a Peace Corps volunteer. And we moved to Utah, where I eventually was able to work for a television station, the NBC affiliate, and they had a news magazine show called Extra, which was sort of like a window to the outside world, and we could do films on anything we wanted, from the environment to Indian issues to homelessness to whatever. And for about 15 years, I worked for the television station and also made documentary films. And then we moved to Washington, D.C., where Stanley became head of the School of Architecture at Catholic University. And I was lucky enough to get a job at National Geographic Television because of my work in Salt Lake City. And I was there for 5 years, and I made 5 films, one on Jane Goodall and one on the gauchos of Argentina, and one on gold mining in Venezuela. So always interested in different cultures. And after 5 years, I decided to start my own company, and I've been making films ever since. Now, why a cookbook? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that I wanted to give something back to Tunisia since I was a Peace Corps volunteer there in the 60s. And the second reason is that my husband, Stanley, had been invited to help a school of architecture in Tunisia, a university, to help them help their curriculum. And so I went with him, and we were there for about over a period of 3 years. And we were staying in this little hotel, and the president of the university had his cook for us. And the food was so delicious, I said to the cook, I would love to learn how to make these recipes. And so I looked in the bookstores in Tunisia and online, and there were really no good cookbooks about Tunisian cuisine. It's interesting because people know about Moroccan cooking, they know about Lebanese cooking, they know about Italian, all the Mediterranean areas, but nobody knows about Tunisian cooking. So I was complaining to the president, and he said, well, why don't you and my wife, his wife, Rauda, do a cookbook? And so I naively said, okay. And so for the next 3 years, essentially, I watched the cook and Rauda in their kitchen cooking, and I took down the recipes. And I also have a background in cooking a little bit because my mother was the restaurant critic for the LA Times for about 18 years. So I've always had an interest in cooking, and I've always felt that food was a way to bridge bridges. And I mean, everybody wants to share their favorite recipe. And whenever I've been on a film shoot, always the people want to present whatever it is. When I was in Argentina with the gauchos, they wanted to roast a lamb. When I was in Yemen, they wanted to fix a wonderful Yemenese spread. So people are always just overjoyed to share their food, and I've always felt this is one of the best ways to bring people together. So documentary filmmaking and I feel cooking, and therefore the cookbook, they're similar in that you're trying to bring people together. And I've always, in a way, trying to figure out ways to bring the world smaller, make it smaller, and then maybe it's very idealistic that there be more peace in the world.
That's great. I love your story. Can you tell us a little bit about the key characteristic of Tunisian food? Which countries colonized or invaded Tunisia and influenced its cuisine throughout its history?
Sure. Well, Tunisia is essentially a country that's been on the crossroads of many civilizations. It goes way, way back. I mean, first there were the indigenous Berbers, but then the Phoenicians came, and then there were the Romans. I know a lot of people have heard of Carthage. That's in Tunisia. And after the Romans, there were the Byzantines, and then there were the Arabs in the 7th century, and eventually came the Andalusians from Spain, and then there were the French in the 19th century. So it's had all these different civilizations coming through this little country that's on the Mediterranean between now Libya and Algeria, but very close to Italy. So the Tunisians are very proud of the fact that their cuisine is a mixture of all of these different influences. And they call themselves a Mediterranean cuisine because they're very, very proud of the fact that it is extremely healthy. They only use fresh ingredients, and they're very proud of their vegetables and their fish and, of course, their lamb.
Great. And can you all talk a little about the spices they use?
Well, their main spice that they're very proud of is called harissa, and that's essentially a red chili pepper that they mix with garlic and olive oil, and they have that as a condiment for practically everything they eat, and it's very spicy. For Americans, some Americans might find it too spicy, so I always say in my cookbook to put it on the side. There are other spices that they use. There is cumin, turmeric, and coriander are the other 3 spices, and they're now turning out to be extremely healthy spices and becoming sort of a la mode here in the United States, especially turmeric. That, it's supposed to cure everything from arthritis to I don't know, intestinal problems. So it's very interesting that the Tunisians have been using these particular spices for centuries.
Great, great. And just because you've spent a fair amount of time in Tunisia, what are some of your favorite customs and holiday traditions and the way you see food playing a role in the culture?
Well, interestingly enough, the one that I like the best is the simplest. After every meal, the Tunisians serve mint tea with pine nuts floating on top. And it's a great digestive, but it's also, and it's in a little glass, and it's just lovely. And that's after every meal. They also serve a traditional dish, which is called brique à l'oeuf, which is it's a dough like a phyllo dough. It's called masuka, and they drop an egg and they have a little bit of capers and tuna fish in. And this one during the month of Ramadan, which is the Muslim holiday, 1 month a year, 1 month every year is called it's Ramadan, and they fast during the day, and at night they start their what they call the breakfast with a brick à l'oeuf. So that's a really interesting tradition that after fasting all day long, the first thing they serve is this brick à l'oeuf. Another interesting thing during Ramadan, a lot of their traditional food goes back to this whole idea of Ramadan because they've been fasting during the day and then they feast at night. And so at the end of the night, just before they have to start fasting again, they essentially fast from dawn to sunset. So just before dawn, they serve a sweet couscous, which is a couscous which they have a little they sweeten it and they use pomegranates and different kind and dates and things in the couscous. So those are three really interesting traditional dishes that they use. Of course, couscous is very Tunisian, and couscous is the traditional dish of all the North African countries, Algeria and Morocco and Tunisia and Libya.
How
But
is
the
it?
Tunisians think that their couscous is better than the Moroccans, and of course the Moroccans think theirs is better. The Tunisian couscous is a finer couscous. So each country, they pride themselves on their couscous.
That's great. Can you share some of the stories you experienced when writing the book and taking photos? What's wonderful about this book is that you have a background in film and obviously visual representation, and the photographs are really wonderful. And also, you tell wonderful stories about the dishes. It's not just recipes. So, anything you'd like to share about the process of writing, learning the customs, deciding the visual look for the book?
Um, well, yes. First of all, I wanted this, as I think I mentioned, to be a gift back to Tunisia because I spent the 2 years in the Peace Corps and I got so much out of their culture. And so I wanted to spread their culture to the rest of the world, especially since nobody knows much about this little country and certainly not about their cuisine. And since I'm a documentary filmmaker, I wanted to also visually present their culture. So all the photographs I have used, I also had the tapestries behind them. I used Tunisian pottery, and just to give it more of a feel. Plus, I took pictures. Tunisia has a lot of Roman ruins, and it's one of the more extraordinary countries when it comes to the Roman ruins. Of course, there's Carthage, but there's also these unbelievably preserved towns like Duga, and they have a wonderful Colosseum, a Roman Colosseum that's better preserved than the one in Rome in El Gem. And so I wanted to show some of these wonderful Roman ruins as well as just the beauty of the country. There is a town in Tunisia called Sidi Bou Said that is famous for its doors, its blue doors. It sits on top of a mountain overlooking the Mediterranean. And that's a place also where a lot of Tunisians go to have their tea in these wonderful tea houses. So, and as a documentary filmmaker, I sort of looked at this cookbook as how I would make a film. So I essentially went into the kitchen with the two women, Hasna and Rauda, and watched as they cooked and took pictures and then asked questions. And one of the interesting things was that that Hasna, who only speaks Arabic, she also doesn't measure. So I brought a measuring cup and some measuring spoons, and I'd say, "Okay, Hasna, how much in this measuring cup?" And she'd point, or how many tablespoons, and then she would point. Plus, I don't really speak Arabic. I only speak French. And so she would explain in Arabic then to Rauda, who would then explain it to me in French, and then I'd write it down in English. So there was a little bit of loss in translation there. So when I came back to the United States, I actually tried out all the recipes 3 times. Plus, I had about 20 friends, and I made sure that they tried out the recipes and gave me feedback. And one of the things I discovered is that the Tunisian spices, of course, they're fresher, were a little bit stronger. And so I needed, one of the things I had to adjust a little bit were with the spices. As for different things, for instance, the brique à l'œuf, which is this like a phyllo dough that you drop an egg in and then you fry it in oil. It turns out, what is the origin? Well, it turns out really people don't know. It could be the indigenous Berbers that go back 5,000 years, or some people think it's Jewish in origin, because on the island of Djerba, there's a huge Jewish population that goes back 3,000 years, and they think maybe that's where the brique comes from, or they think maybe it came from the Ottoman Empire and Turkey, because brique is the word is close to a word in Turkish that means to fold. And so nobody really knows, but I found it fascinating just to learn a little bit about the history of the food that way. Plus, I mean, for instance, with couscous, it used to be that the women would be the ones that would make the couscous. Now they don't anymore. Generally, you buy it in the store, but it used to be that this used to be a huge, huge tradition during Ramadan again, and it also gave the women a little bit of extra money, because they would, it's semolina or durum, it's a durum wheat that then they shift it through these big shifters, and this used to be a big income for women, and now, no, the Tunisians mainly get it out of their stores.
That's wonderful. I made the brique à l'œuf from the cookbook. The cookbook is called Discovering Tunisian Cuisine. It's available on Amazon, and we also have links to it on our website. But the brique à l'œuf, the dough is like phyllo, but it's amazing. It was a revelation to me to make this dish, and it was absolutely wonderful. And Judy has a demo on her website. She's got a video. We also have it on our Instagram television and our YouTube channel. And then we have the recipe on our Magical Melting Pot Instagram and the blog on the Magical Melting Pot website. So it's really wonderful, just delicious food. It's relatively simple. It's very healthy. A lot of ingredients are easy to come by. And I think it's just, for most people who don't know anything about Tunisian cuisine, it's really an eye-opener. So Judy, I want to thank you so much. Really, you're so fascinating. I love all the stories. It was a treat for me to learn more about Tunisian cuisine. And if people want to learn more, they can buy your book. It's also available on Amazon, or go to your website. And again, we have the link to the website within all of our social media and on our website. So thank you, everybody. And stay tuned for our next great interview.
Thank you, Michelle. It was a delight.